Hi everybody, welcome. This is Soul Food Salon. I'm Jeannie Rosner. This is our first event here other than our yoga events, and going forward this is where we will be doing the talks. Every year I partner with either a different nonprofit. Last year we partnered with Stanford Medical Center. This year we're partnered with Food Corps, and essentially they are present in 18 states. They are in 350 schools, at-need schools. So basically they place an AmeriCorps service member in these at-need schools, and that person is there for a year, teaches the students all about healthy eating, exposes them to different fruits and vegetables that they may never have seen before. They get in a school garden if they have one. They get into the lunch room and help the lunch ladies, etc. So we're trying to help fund the Emily Henry. She is the Food Corps person in East Palo Alto right now. So far our group has raised $6,800, which is fabulous. My goal, however, is to raise $10,000, so we still have about $4,000 more to go. And on that vein, if you want to make a donation to Food Corps, you can go on my website, the main page that opens, soulfoodsalon.com, the About page, kind of in the middle, there's a little blurb about Food Corps. There's a video, and then there's a place where a link that you can make a donation. So I'd appreciate that support if you want. Today is Dr. Dimitriu sharing with us his knowledge. He's a psychiatrist and a sleep specialist. He has a practice in Menlo Park where he sees patients with a variety of conditions ranging from depression to anxiety to insomnia and other sleep disorders. And today he's going to share with us some basic ideas that he has learned and gleaned from working with his patients to help all of us lead to better mind optimization, allowing substantial life and relationship improvements. So without further ado, Alex.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here today. Jeannie, thank you so much for hosting these events. And I'm so excited to share this with you because in some ways, what you're about to see is sort of an abbreviated, it's going to be dense. There's a lot of information. But this is sort of an abbreviated handbook for pretty much anybody that would be entering my practice. We're going to be talking a little bit about medications. We're going to be talking a little bit about psychology and general life practice and life philosophy as well. So as Jeannie mentioned, I'm the owner at Menlo Park Psychiatry and Sleep Medicine. I've been in practice for about a decade now. I'm board certified in sleep medicine, but I'm also board certified in psychiatry. To me, it's interesting to see that not that many psychiatrists are fully aware of sleep medicine. Sleep medicine is tremendously important because, to me, it's the yin and yang of how we are during the day. In many ways, sleep plays such an integral role in everything that we do that to treat people's daytime functions, whether it's anxiety, cognitive performance, or anything else, without an appreciation for sleep feels like we're really missing a lot. With a specialization in sleep, we've sort of shifted roles with a lot of my clients from repair to actual optimization. And we're actually getting people to really thrive and do amazing things that they couldn't do before. And we've had some amazing success stories, I'm grateful to say, and I do attribute that to that specific combination of psychiatry and sleep. I feel very fortunate. I feel fortunate, and I also feel like I have a very difficult job. Practicing psychiatry in one of the smartest places in America in a concierge practice can be a bit challenging, but it's also been immensely rewarding. And what I can tell you is that I feel very blessed and fortunate in a way, because I kind of see myself as like a bee that gets to pollinate very interesting and intelligent flowers. And what ends up happening is you learn from everybody something new. A lot of the clients I treat are often smarter, more talented, more accomplished than myself. And I get to sort of be that central hub, though, that gets to help different people. And oftentimes what happens is you learn tricks from one person that you can translate into helping somebody else. What you're about to see is kind of like a summary and a distillate of those things I've learned. So I wanted to start by talking about art and science, because psychiatry really is this perfect mix of art and science, and that's kind of what drew me to the field. My mom was a pianist, my dad was an engineer. That kind of set me up to sort of appreciate both the math and the physics underlying what I do, but also to have an appreciation for the art form of what I do as well. I feel honored to also be able to work on what I consider to be the most complex thing known to mankind, which is the human mind. It really, there's nothing that we found that's more complex, and it's my honor to actually be able to work on that. I'm going to start with Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, because to me this is the perfect confluence of art and science. And what we see here is this beautiful relationship of art and science where God is giving life to Adam. And this is, Michelangelo painted this, I believe it was 1519. And this particular piece of art really got my attention about a year ago when I learned something very peculiar and interesting. So we've all seen this on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but it's been speculated actually that God is in quite an interesting shape. If you look at it, the shroud that he's in, some anatomists have actually speculated looks like a human brain. And the question then becomes, what is God? Is God, and Michelangelo, mind you, also was an anatomist at one point. Well, he was an anatomic illustrator, so he knew his anatomy very well. He may have had some issues with the church as well, and in drawing this, he might have been trying to send a secret hidden message that, that indeed, you know, the creation of life is human consciousness and the human mind. And that truly is what makes us godlike. You don't have to take my word for it, because this article was actually published in the Journal of the American Medical Association by the doctor that discovered this, or the doctor that noticed this. And his name was Frank Meshberger, and in 1990 that article was published in JAMA, where anatomists have confirmed that indeed he might actually be onto something. So we're going to start by focusing on some core biological factors. What I wanted to point out is I think underlying everybody's psychology and everybody's social interactions is your fundamental mood states. And there's certain key vital signs that to me are always so important. I think before you ask yourself, what are you doing in life and how's your family and everything else, you need to kind of fall back on some basic internal metrics that are so important. To me, those metrics are fundamentally mood. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you enthusiastic? Are you expecting of good things or bad things to happen? And your mood state plays a very fundamental role. The next thing I assess often is anxiety. And you'll notice that next to anxiety, I also have flexibility. My belief is that people that are very anxious tend to be very rigid. They tend to get stuck in patterns and ways. And in some ways, the less anxiety you have, the more openness you have to new experience. The other factor I look at, which plays a tremendous role, is energy and sleep. Energy fundamentally just drives you. It gives you energy to either be happy or sad. And for that reason, to me, it's also a very fundamental marker. And lastly is cognition, and that's our cognitive performance. That's your memory, your ability to recall, your ability to retain information and process the experiences that you've had through life. I'm a sleep doctor, so I got to focus on sleep. And I can't say this enough. If there's anything you take home from the lecture today, please realize that in the fuzzy realm of the art and science of psychiatry, the only vital sign that we have that is objective is sleep. Really think about that for a second. Internal medicine can check your temperature, they can check your blood pressure, they can check your cholesterol, and they can treat the number. In psychiatry, we do not have any numbers to treat. Everything is self-report, everything is how you felt, and that can get a little subjective, and we're going to go into why in a little bit. But I can't emphasize enough that sleep really should be considered a vital sign. It's so important in everything that we do. And I tell everybody that if sleep is off, look deeper. There is likely something else off as well. It's very rare that sleep is just off by itself in isolation. A brilliant concept in psychiatry is called the biopsychosocial model. This is kind of a roadmap for what we're going to be doing here. If you imagine the green circle would sort of be your home, and the two blue circles would be, you know, the husband and wife, the spouse and wife. And what you would notice is underlying everyone's psychology is everyone's biology. To me, this is extremely important because it's important to realize that you have to address problems on the level at which they occur. Too many times, somebody might be suffering from bad heartburn or have like panic attacks or depression, and they're going to be worried about why their marriage is not going well, or why their interactions with their kids are not going well. And I see this so many times in my practice where people are just misfocused on the wrong aspect of the problem. So a lot of what we do here and a lot of what I do in my job is really focus down and hone in on what level is the problem. Because the reality is that if you have a terrible health problem, it's going to be hard to see a psychologist and work around that. And it'll be perhaps even harder to then incorporate and work with your wife or your loved ones or any relationship in your life if you're fundamentally in pain and uncomfortable. So this is going to be kind of a roadmap for what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start and focus some more on biology. We're going to shift to some psychology. We're going to dabble into some social things as well, and perhaps we'll touch on some spiritual things too, because I think that's the outermost bubble in the diagram. So a lot of times people ask me, how do you know if you're okay? This is a very big question, like when is something wrong? And the fundamental answer there becomes, what I often tell people is that you need to ask yourself, is there any level of functional impairment? Are you able to do what you normally do without any interruption? Are you able to sleep at night? Are you able to get up and get through a day full of work and come home feeling energized and good? I'll often ask people about, how well do they recharge? There is such a thing called high-functioning depression, where people can push through a lot of things, and they come home and they feel okay, but the reality is they have little energy to do anything else. So one of the things I'll often ask my patients is like, do you have the energy? When the weekend is over, are you recharged? When the day is over, do you feel like you're ready for the next day of work? And too many times I think we see people that just keep pushing through when indeed they are not recharging. And to me, this is a very important thing that we keep an eye on. Anhedonia is a classic manifestation of depression. It's the loss of interest in pleasure and pleasurable activity. We see that quite often as well. I use the analogy of the drowning person because to me this is a very fundamental concept. Drowning people do desperate things. I used to work as a lifeguard, and in my experience working as a lifeguard, we were always told to approach the drowning person cautiously because the drowning person might desperately cling to things and drown you along with them. That's the swimming analogy, but the life analogy of that is that depressed people that are buffered out, tired, sick and tired, I hear that a lot, can be irritable, can be nasty, they can be short-tempered. And the answer is it's not a psychological problem necessarily. It could also be more fundamental. And I think we all need to be looking there. If we look at anxiety, my understanding of anxiety is that there's fundamentally a disconnect between the heart and mind. I think society increasingly pushes us and rewards us for our cognitive excellence, our accomplishments. But I think all too often we find ourselves in situations where the heart says no and the mind says yes. You could be stuck in a marriage where you're not happy. You could be going to a job that really rubs you the wrong way. And in my opinion, anxiety is what results when you keep pushing that forward. Fatigue is a big marker of anxiety, and the question always is why? Fatigue becomes a marker of anxiety because you have to resist impulses all day. If you are not happy with a given situation, throughout the day, you could basically envision that you are sort of resisting an urge to leave, resisting an urge to get up and quit, resisting an urge to tell your boss that they're an idiot. But that level of resisting impulses all day has actually been documented in the literature. It's been called ego fatigue. People that are exhausted like that all day are more likely to come home and binge eat, more likely to come home and drink, and more likely to come home and just do anything to sort of not resist impulse any longer. So I think it's important to kind of realize as we go forward that there's also this relationship between heart and mind that plays a fundamental role. And the question then becomes, how did we get so far in our minds? How did this happen? And the answer is that society rewards it. There's a classic Aesop fable. I'm sure, have you guys ever heard The Ant and the Grasshopper? Do you guys know the story? So the ant and the grasshopper, the grasshopper played the fiddle all summer and was enjoying himself and jumping around, and the ants were preparing for the winter. And then the winter came. And when the winter came, the ant was well fed and warm, and the grasshopper was cold and hungry. And most fundamentally, anxiety does teach us that it has a role. It's useful. But the problem, I think, is that anxiety can go too far. I have patients that come in and they'll often tell me that they feel like they've missed life. They'll end up in situations where they'll make all the money in the world, but they cannot enjoy it. So we look at these situations where people are inherently disconnected from life in some ways as a result of being overly prepared. And that level of over-preparation is kind of where we get in trouble. Everything I'm going to tell you throughout this presentation is intended to be taken on balance. Nobody's telling you to quit your job and go home and lounge in your recliner all day. But do think of things from like a vector model. This is the engineer in me sees it as like a balance between forces. And on one end you have working too much, and on the other end you have relaxing and enjoying. We'll look into that a little more too. I'm going to take a short dip and talk to you guys a little bit about pharmacology. I think we can learn some very valuable lesson in pharmacology. Life principles as well, I think, can be extrapolated from what you guys are about to learn about what I consider to be the basics of taking psychiatric medication, any medication, and perhaps even more globally, any life intervention more generally. People always ask me the question, why do people need to be on medications? How can this be? And my answer to that quite simply is that I think life has picked up to a pace that's sort of unnatural. We're doing things that we have never done before at a speed that we have never done before. And the reality is also that technology advances exponentially. Your computer 10 years ago was not even 1,000th of what you have in your pockets right now. So the world is speeding up at this unprecedented rate, and quite frankly, our biology cannot keep up. And that's usually what starts the conversation, at least for some level of pharmacologic intervention when it's necessary. And I should tell you also that I don't see medications as the end-all, but I do see medications at some point as subsiding inner turmoil and inner anxiety enough to allow the therapy to work, to allow the marriage counseling and career counseling to take place. Some very fundamental lessons from pharmacology to me, most fundamentally, good science. So many times people get this wrong. People decide they're going to do 3 different things at the same time and they don't understand why it's working or why it isn't. I always tell my patients, if we're going to do something, we're going to do one thing at a time and we're going to allow time to see how it's working and if it's helping. Be aware of all the factors in experiments. Even if you're starting a new antidepressant, let's say, the reality is that there's life happening around it, and you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And for that reason, it's better that you don't start a new medication, relocate to a new town, and try to get a divorce at the same time, because it's just bad science. Forget the antidepressant. This is just a life lesson in general. Try to be good scientists. Whatever you do, stick to one intervention and give it time to play out and focus. Another hugely important concept I take from climbing. And the climbing analogy says that you need to have 3 points of contact before you reach and try to get a fourth. Think about this for a second. To me, I look at it as like, to me, this is a stability problem. And I think all of us should be asking ourselves, before we take on a new factor, a new variable, is the system stable? Because too many times people will have unstabilized factors in their lives. The kids aren't doing great, the marriage is on the rocks, and you decide, hey, I need a job change now too. It's not a good idea. And pharmacologically, we see the same thing. People will be on small doses of 3 different medications. They're not sure what this one does, they're not sure what that one does. Maybe we should add a 3rd one to make it better. And that's where people get in trouble, because you're just adding instability. So at minimum, for me, the lesson here is I think you need to think about the energy in the system and ask yourself, do you need more energy or less energy in the system right now before you take that next step? Because all of us tend to want to run and all of us tend to go for the next best thing. But the reality sometimes is you got to stabilize your points of contact before you move on to that next thing. Have you guys ever seen these shower dials? The kind that like you turn and the temperature changes like a minute later? You know what kind of shower experience that is. You know it, you've been there. And believe it or not, the same thing happens in life where people don't have the patience to wait to see what happens. You tried getting to bed early for 3 nights in a row and you didn't feel much better, so you said, to hell with that, over, I'm not doing this anymore. And that's not necessarily the right answer. We see this all the time in pharmacology also. People decided, I took Zoloft for 5 days, I'm not sure if it helped, so I stopped it. Or I had a bad day and I decided to take more. And people are doing this zigzagging all the time. And what you see is basically the same kind of shower experience that you get. I compare it also to jerky driving. It's like, imagine if somebody was driving the car like this, it doesn't make for a very good ride. And in my work as a psychiatrist, it doesn't make for good treatment. And that's where I encourage people to just have patience and give things time to see how they go. If you're fiddling with the shower dial too much, you're not going to have a good shower. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Speaking of starting, continuing, and stopping medications, I want to talk about some important ideas here also. I tell everybody, whenever we start a new medication, accept that there's going to be 20% variability. It's not going to be perfect immediately. And just because you think, you might feel that your earlobe is a little itchy 3 days after starting the medication, or you might feel that, I don't know, I felt a little funny, I'm not sure, you decided to stop. And then you come see me 2 weeks later and you tell me that this happened. To me, I tell everyone that this is the importance of tolerating a little bit of wobble. But I keep it at 20%. Nobody's saying that if you started a medication or if you started any intervention in your life and you really don't like it, it's not a 20%, it's an 80%. By all means stop, let somebody know. But also, let's not be hyper-vigilant and hyper-reactive to every bump in the road. That theme is going to come back later, because what I also want to point out is once people are doing an intervention, whether it's a psychological intervention or a medication, I tell everybody to just ride the wave a little bit. People are too quick to say, I feel better, I want to stop. And that again comes down to the rapid dialing the shower too quick. I also think it's important to attain stability for a while and keep it. The human mind learns patterns, and the longer you can stay in a better state, whether it's because you're sleeping more at night, whether it's because you started a medication or did any other intervention in your life, lock it in for a while. Sit with it, get used to it. Don't be in a hurry to say, okay, I'm better now, I'm done. No, just coast a little bit. An important thing I also call is cliffing. I think cliffing to me is people that once they are better, live their lives waiting for the other shoe to drop. Oh my God, if something gets a little bit worse, this is the beginning of the end. And that's a dangerous way to live life. And historically, I also point out to people that even though you may have had these wild waves in the past, you've had a period of stability for 3 months. And sometimes a bump in the road might just be a bump in the road. And in my experience as a psychiatrist, more often than not, that's what it is. But too many of us live thinking that, oh my God, this is the beginning of the end, any day now. And that kind of expectation bias can be dangerous. The other very important thing I wanted to tell you when we're looking at this wobble rule here, I'm a big believer in what I call the yoga principle. What the yoga principle says, as I made this up, you can't find this. I'm a believer that if a yoga teacher pushes on your back and you learn that you can touch your toes, that's an important lesson that you've learned. But sure, in the back of your mind you're saying, wow, yes, I can touch my toes, but gosh, the yoga teacher is the one that's helping me do this. The Zoloft is what's making me be cool in these circumstances. And that's okay. It's great that people have attained that stability, and people will oftentimes want to come off of medication. And the answer there becomes, do so very slowly. As a matter of fact, do it so slowly that you don't know where the medication ended and where you began. Because my belief is that if indeed you've learned that you can touch your toes, it's great. Now you have that image in your head. The trick is, can the pressure be released off your back slowly enough that you won't know where you begin and the yoga teacher ended? And that to me is a very important principle in guiding a lot of things we do. Phase out slowly. Don't be in a hurry to say, I'm better, I'm off, I'm done, because that always leads to trouble. I can't emphasize enough that we are terrible at remembering mood states. I repeat, sleep is really the only measurable thing we have in psychiatry, and that also means that your own gauge of your mood is awful. We have what I call, you can call it recency bias. I use the picture of space-time distortion by the planet Earth because this illustrates the point as well. However you felt these past 2 weeks, you are very likely to extrapolate and assume that this is how your year has been. If you've had a great couple of weeks, you're likely to think things have been amazing for as long as I can remember. If you've had a terrible couple of weeks, you might start thinking my whole life has sucked. And for that reason, because we are such poor historians, and believe me, as your psychiatrist, I do my best to catalog all these things, but in the end, nothing is as meaningful as your own words in writing on paper. I call it like a photo shoot. You want to be able to look back through different times and say, wow, well, okay, this was me a year ago. This is very different than how I am now. All too often, people, when they've gotten better, will assume that this is how it's always been and now I don't need to do anything because I was fine all along. And in those instances, I wish so much that we had a little bit of something to lean on, that they had written themselves to go back and see how they have done. In your own words, not mine. I'm also a big believer in what I call emotional anchors. Emotional anchors, I'm a big believer that when things are going well, you should write about it. You should live it, breathe it, feel it, talk to your friends about it, annoy them with it. Because in doing so, you're kind of really setting an anchor in that mood state. And it's healthy, whether, when things change later in life, things get better, things get worse, it's nice to be able to come back and see how things were and what worked and what didn't. We're going to be finishing up medications soon, I promise, but there's another very important thing I need to talk to everybody about, and that's what I call the Yelp effect. Everybody goes online and reads about medication side effects. Terrible idea. Sure, do some, get a sense for it, talk to your doctor, but at the end of the day, you can't rely on blogs and people's individual reports for how things work. Why? Because like Yelp and restaurants and reviews of anything else, people tend to go on to say either really good things or really bad things. My belief is that 80% of people that had an average experience didn't care to do anything at all. And too many times people end up reading the scariest stuff. And I want to point out also that there's something called a nocebo. Do you guys know what a nocebo is? There's a placebo, which is expecting good things to happen. Oh, I'm going to get better. This sugar pill will make my headache go away. This is great. But there's also a nocebo. And the nocebo is expecting bad things to happen. And the longer you spend focusing and obsessing and thinking about everything that could go wrong, the worse this could be. So I tell everybody, stick to PubMed. If you're curious about any drug, any intervention, PubMed is it. PubMed is a giant free online repository of randomized clinical trials. Magnesium threonate, supposed to improve cognition and cognitive performance. You're reading the reviews on Amazon. Sure, probably better than Yelp or any other blog, but ultimately, whenever people ask me, hey, what do you think of this nutraceutical, this supplement, or this medication? I go straight to PubMed. If you take anything home from this slide, just remember, if you're looking to search for something, type PubMed in with it. And do that search and look at real scientific data, not people's anecdotal reports, because I promise you, those will scare the crap out of you. Go big or go home. Too many times in anything that we do, we tend to there's a tendency to half-ass it, to do a half-hearted attempt and a half-hearted approach at doing something, and that's also pharmacologically where people get in trouble. They took their medication 2 out of 7 days this week, they missed 3 days, and they're not sure if it's working. They took a medicine that's supposed to take 6 weeks to work for 2 weeks, and they decided that did not work. For me, this principle of taking things to their fullest, I think applies well beyond medications also. I think whatever we do, whether we decide to get to bed earlier, start a yoga practice, start a specific diet, do it for real. Do it for real, stick to it. Don't change your mind 3 days in. Because my worry is, I think whenever we don't do things fully, we end up living a life of regret. We end up looking back at opportunities and thinking, did I try my best? Did I do everything I could have done to optimize that situation? And if you're not giving it your best, that's always going to be a possibility. So I use this example in both pharmacology, and I use this example as widely as marriage and relationship difficulties and career goals. If you're going to do something, do it thoroughly. I'm going to shift gears and talk about a little bit of psychology now. And I wanted to point out to you guys, the joke among psychiatrists is, how many shrinks does it take to change a light bulb? Does anybody know how many shrinks it takes? So the answer is none. The light bulb has to want to change. And it's true. The reality is, there's so many people living life that don't even understand that they're light bulbs. It's the guy flipping out road raging that you passed on your way here today. There's people that definitely have issues that don't understand that they do. So to me, I look at all the work that I do as 3 levels of change. The first of which is actually understanding that there's a problem. Because I promise you, a majority of people don't even know that there's something wrong. The second step is deciding to do something about it. And the third step is actually going through and executing on your plans. And that is why change is so hard. Because it takes it takes recognition, which a lot of us are going to be avoidant of, and then it takes perseverance to execute it. The next slides in this talk are about how to bring on that change and just different ways of looking at things to make that change easier. The first and most important thing, I think for me, that I've learned in my practice is the importance of popping out. This is the reality that things are not happening to you, things are just happening. And popping out is the ability to recognize that you are a light bulb. Popping out is the ability to pop out and realize, hey, I'm annoyed today. Or I'm having a great day, I feel so good. But it's at least having that slight ability to just, for a moment, look at self externally and understand what's going on rather than being in it. The Buddhists compared this example, you guys have heard of it, it's you're sitting on the bank of a river watching your feelings go by. You're not in the river. But gosh, that river tends to suck you in. We're designed that way. And that's why it takes a concerted effort to pop out. The other way I look at popping out that for me is really important, and I was taught this by a psychologist in my residency, it's that imagine you had a mini Alex sitting on your shoulder. the next time you get angry at your spouse or the next time you have an issue at work, and ask yourself, what would Alex say right now that I ought to be doing? Am I overreacting? Am I thinking too much? Am I doing too much? Imagine for a moment just popping out of that situation and understanding that just looking at it externally and understanding that you have feelings, and that's okay, but they're going to come and go. The trick is to just not react. We're going to get a little deeper into that as well. A fundamental balance. So I told you guys, I think of things in balances. And to me, one of the most fundamental balances I look at throughout life is this balance between Darwin and Buddha. And of course, there's going to be this is not a literal interpretation of Darwinism and Buddhism, but what I want to point out is that we have two very extreme realities here. On one end, you have Darwinism, right? Darwinism is like kill or be killed, conquer, rule, be number one, get more stuff, have a fancier car than your neighbors, make more money, and it's egocentric. If you think about it, it's about me. It's us versus them. In a Darwinian model, you could almost envision nature is a force to be tamed. It's an enemy. On the Buddhist side of things, you have ego dissolution. We are one. Why compete with your neighbors? Because we're all related. We're all in the same planet Earth problem together. We're all in the ship together, right? So we're looking at egocentrism versus ego dissolution. I tell all my patients also that you needed Darwinism to get where you are today. You needed it to get through school. You needed it to kick ass and be successful in your job and get to where you are. But you need to be a Buddhist to enjoy it. Because if you're always thinking about that presentation and what you got to do the next day, you are not going to enjoy your kids. You are not going to enjoy your family. You are not going to enjoy food, wine, or sex for that matter. To me, those are all very important things that really call on us to be present. And the reality is that a Darwinian way of looking at life it's not presence. It's planning for the future, and it's thinking what you should have done in the past. This comes back to the ant and grasshopper a little bit in an interesting way. But the reality is, there is something to be said about the grasshopper having some fun. So I tell my patients, to enjoy food, sex, wine, and family, you need to be present. And to me, that's a very important thing. And I think everything that we do in life, we should think, are we too Buddhist? Are we too Darwinian? The answer is that there is no fixed set point, and neither extreme is likely good. But being able to navigate that with different life circumstances is where people actually excel. As soon as I pitch this theory to my patients and my friends, everybody says, oh God, whoa, I'm going to become a slug. Nothing's going to happen. But the reality, I also think, is that, most of us in this busy world, especially here locally in Silicon Valley, we're all driving too fast to begin with. And what I explain to everybody is that, if you're driving 160 miles an hour and you slow down by 40 miles an hour, you'll still be going plenty fast. To me, the slowing down principle speaks to the importance, not of saying you need to just stop driving and shut down completely and stop striving for anything, but slow it down a little bit, because sometimes I think we all try too hard. To illustrate the point further, an ancient Chinese philosopher asks his students, what in this moment is missing? Ask yourselves this. You're sitting here. Hopefully you're not in pain, you're not hot, you're not cold, you're not hungry, you're wearing nice clothes, you're sitting comfortably. If you really narrow down our experience into this narrow moment, you begin to realize that in presence, there is actually no sorrow or grief or there's nothing that's missing in this moment. And Eckhart Tolle wrote a great book, The Power of Now, and in it he describes that fundamentally the source of human unhappiness is time travel. You're just too busy thinking about what should have happened, what could have been, what you should have said to that friend a year ago, and on the other end, you're going into the future. Mind you, also, this ties back into the Darwinism and the ant and grasshopper. It's all related. But the reality is that when you're over-preparing and when you're overthinking, you are not here. And you are definitely not enjoying your chocolate, and you are definitely not enjoying your kids. And that comes back to those missed moments that to me are so important. So where do we look to learn about ourselves? For me, the answer is always nature. I think in the beautiful natural world around us, there's answers and there's beauty to some of the deepest questions that define that we ask of our psychology. One of the most powerful lessons for me has always come from fractals. Do you guys know what fractals are? So fractals are this they think fractals are the language of God. Fractals is kind of how the complexity of the beautiful world you see is made. And the way fractals work is patterns repeat on different scales. I picked ferns because this is a very easy one to see. If you look carefully at the ferns, you'll notice that the big fern leaf looks a little bit like the little fern leaf. And the little fern leaf is made of littler fern leaves. And these littler fern leaves could be made of littler fern leaves yet. The brilliant thing about fractals is with a very simple set of rules, one fern leaf, you can design immensely intricate and complex things. And we see fractals everywhere. Look around. I mean, I'll give you guys some more examples. Romanesque lettuce is beautiful. You look at it and you think, God, that thing is so complicated and intricate. To me, this is almost like human psychology. It's so complicated and intricate, yet fundamentally there's some very simple rules that are very basic and prevalent. Like the fern leaf, for Romanesque lettuce, there's the rule of little nubbits. And the little nubbits are part of bigger nubbits. And the bigger nubbits are part of bigger nubbits yet. You see the bigger nubbits here. And those bigger nubbits make up an even bigger nubbit. This is what we call self-symmetry. Self-symmetry in mathematics and in fractal theory explains that very simple patterns repeated on different scales can make things look really complicated, like trees. Trees are immensely complicated, and all a tree really is a simple rule, branch and divide. But look what trees can do. You look at a tree and you would never think a rule so simple could create something so complex. And I'm going to tie this into psychology in a minute, because the reality is humans are not that different. If you want to speak about anatomy, our blood vessels look like trees. Same rule, branch and divide, branch and divide, branch and divide. And it can get infinitely complex. Our lungs are designed the same way, our bones are designed the same way. So we're very much in many ways living fractals. There's this importance of simple rules that repeat on different scales that give rise to the complexity of life, and I also think our psychology. So what can we learn from fractals? Because the importance here is the importance of small rules. And the example that always comes to mind is boot camp. I always ask the question, why in boot camp do they care that you shine your shoes and you make your bed? Because you're more likely to listen and charge to battle when you're told to do so. Martin Luther King was known to have said, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And another manifestation of the power of small things is called the broken windows theory, which, granted, it's been debated, but they've argued that towns where there's a broken window, graffiti, and litter on the street are more likely to have higher level crimes committed as well. I bring this back to the psychology lesson because the importance of these small things that we do every day cannot be underscored. Because we are biological systems, because we are part of a world that is possibly fractal, you have to understand that each little nubbit of that Romanesque lettuce is tremendously important because it creates the complexity of that whole vegetable. And that's one single branching pattern has the ability to create the complexity of that tree. So how can we implement this? What can we do with this? What I'll often tell people, you got to practice driving in the parking lot. Practice when it's easy. If you decide you're going to make your own tree, it's much harder to make the whole tree as a whole rather than to start with one trunk and two divides. And that's, I think, what fractals teach us about psychology. You got to practice driving in the parking lot. Too many times I have patients come tell me also that, big meeting, important day tomorrow, and gosh, I couldn't fall asleep all night. I was trying to meditate and I couldn't. I asked them, have you ever meditated before? And the answer is often no. And this is, again, where it's like you're choosing the worst possible time to practice. So this isn't just about, practicing, for meditation or practicing for hard times, but this fractal theory applies to good things as well. If you decide that you want to have more gratitude in your life, if you decide that you want to have more acceptance, less judgment, every day is an opportunity to do that. As you walk out of here today, it's your choice whether you decide to look at the trees around you and say, wow, we live in a beautiful world, or gosh, I better get going, I got to get dinner ready, and da-da-da, and you're busy. The reality is we live in a magical, beautiful world, and it's just a matter of stopping to appreciate it, and it's the small things that count. And I hope that you guys can understand that relationship with the fractals. I tell a lot of my patients also, as you go about life, People are always worried about politics, giant, global warming and definite real world problems. But I'll ask them, what is the utility of worrying about it on that level? More importantly, the answer becomes, what can you do locally that matters? This is also a fractal concept. It's great to think about the tree, but ask yourself, what on a very fundamental level matters? Because that's where you have control. And too many people, I just get lost in these big issues. And this isn't just about global politics. This is about life situations too. You decided it's time to get on and do something with your life. I really need a higher level degree. I need to do something. Okay, what actionable item is there that you can do now? I often quote a Depeche Mode song. Don't just stand there and shout it. Do something about it. And it's true. You need to find what can you do, because you could be doing something today. So resisting reality is another big theme that I see in my work. Too many times, and Buddhists bring this up as well, and there's the fact that you woke up, it's your birthday, and it's raining. And you could sit there and you could have a terrible time about it, but the reality is that won't change the rain. The other way I look at it is, with children go into the pediatrician's office. It can be a very different experience for two kids. The one kid could come in there and say, all right, let's just get the shot, and I'm out of here, give me a lollipop, thank you. And then there's the kid that's like, scrunched up in fear and tense. They're both going to get the shot. It's going to happen. And the reality is that the more you can, resisting when resistance serves no purpose only results in suffering. Chinese philosopher claims, suffering equals pain times resistance. And the root of human suffering is really resisting. And I ask all of you, sure, as you go through life, ask yourself, is there anything I can really change in this situation? Because if there isn't, get your feelings out of the way a little bit and just accept what it is. Consistent with the Chinese finger trap, I also want to talk about the fact that your resistance sometimes gives things power. The more you fight something, don't think about pink elephants, right? The more you fight something, the worse it can be, and the more power you give it. And this is manifest in my work. I see it often. I'll tell you guys a quick story. People with panic attacks. The biggest fear is having another panic attack. And you ask them, what's going to happen? And they say, oh, I don't know. I might lose my mind and get hospitalized and carried out on a stretcher. I ask them, how many times has that happened in your life? None. But it's that very fear of, I don't know, what if, that keeps it going. Insomnia is the same kind of Chinese finger trap problem where, if you woke up this morning and you're already obsessing about how you're going to sleep tonight, it's not going to go well. A lot of things, the more you force them and the more you insist on them being a certain way, the more they resist you and the more power you give them. And that's where, for me, I fall back on the serenity prayer. I need to get this printed and put up in the waiting room, even though I'm not religious, but this is important. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. As you go through life, ask yourself, can you change the circumstance that you're presented with? And if you can't, resisting it doesn't serve any purpose. And you're better off putting your energy somewhere else. I want to talk about the boogeyman. This is a very important principle also in the work that I do. I think that, how many of you remember being afraid of the dark when you were little? I was also afraid of the dark. Are we still afraid of the dark now? Maybe. But far less so. And the reason that we're not afraid of the dark anymore is because at some point we stopped and looked to see what was there. In many ways, to me, that's what therapy, that's what psychiatry is about. In some ways, I think it's terrifying and scary to look under the bed. I don't know what's down there. You know what I mean? The person with panic attacks. I don't know what's going to happen if I have another one. And that's the power of psychotherapy and the power of psychology to influence your behavior, because the reality is, for a lot of the things that you're afraid of, they can be remedied and alleviated with a little bit of light and exploration. And it's so important that we kind of go out a little bit and we don't let yourself have touchy topics, things that you don't want to talk about. And this is where I encourage everybody, work with a therapist, talk with a friend, journal about it. Write it down. And the key trick there is, I think, if it's scary enough, if you're asking yourself, oh gosh, I'm too scared to even write these words on paper, then you definitely should write it down. You can burn it tomorrow, it's okay, but get it out. The human brain, there's a concept called integration, which is bringing back into your experience, laying something to rest, integrating it back into your life rather than saying, I had this terrible thing and I never want to experience that again. So feelings are indeed scary. In another analogy, I compare sitting with feelings to riding a wild stallion. Our relationship between the mind and heart. The heart has given us some crazy rides. It's scared the crap out of you sometimes, and you've also had some amazing, beautiful rides with it. But there's a bit of trepidation and caution in how we approach our feelings because our feelings can be scary. And society doesn't reward us being in our feelings. So it's easier to pick up a glass of scotch or pick up your phone and get busy doing something instead of feeling. And again, it takes tremendous courage to do this. But what I encourage all my patients is that try to sit with it for just a little bit. Sitting on the horse is much like doing an exercise. It's like, okay, if you can, you've sat there for 1 minute, can you now be there for 3? And part of the really important thing about sitting with our feelings, for me, is meditation. I think, part of the way I teach meditation is that it's important, number one, to acknowledge the feeling, but then to also let it go. The goal here is not to ignore your feelings completely. Then we get back to the boogeyman, and the finger trap. The more you want it to go away, the scarier it gets. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who wrote the book on mindfulness, says if you're in pain, the people that do well, that have chronic pain, and this is a scary reality that he's written, lay out the doormat for pain. Invite it in. Surrender. And that gives me goosebumps because that's a scary way to look at things. But the reality then also becomes, what is the utility in resisting that? So I think we should all practice riding on the horse. The next time you're feeling something intense, be with it for a little bit. The reality is most feelings and most mood states tend to change. And in my experience with meditation, I often say, we're all going to suck at it in the beginning. No one's good at it. But I see it as like the first third of the time that you sit, you're going to get ideas. Oh, what about that email? And oh, I forgot bananas. And oh, I should get up. And oh, I'm terrible at this. I'm thinking about bananas and emails. I need to get up. What am I doing here? Waste of time. I can't do this. Your eye opens. How long has it been? Oh, 4 minutes. God damn it. This is not working out. That's exactly what it should be. You're going to be terrible at it because you just haven't done it before. The example I gave with the parking lot is important because I tell everybody that, like meditation, when you started learning to drive, you were terrible at it too. You couldn't listen to music and adjust the rearview mirror and text while you were driving when you were learning. And now look at you, how far you've come. And the reality is, why do you think meditation would be anything different? And that to me, again, it's like, you have to want it. You want it to drive, you're all driving. And to me, sitting with our feelings is another tremendously important part of that. Let's talk about habits a little bit. So habits are dangerous. Michael Pollan wrote a great book, How to Change Your Mind, which was a focus on psychedelics. But in that book, he described something, a really powerful concept, which we are creatures of habit and automation because it makes our lives easy. And you don't need to think about how you're going to handle it when your husband calls you and tells you he's late, or your children call you and say that they got a bad grade in school. You kind of have scripted ways of reacting that you tend to follow. He compares our lives to a ski hill. And he says that by the time you get to be around 40, you've got some tracks in the snow. And gosh, it's so easy to just business as usual. Michael Pollan also says that by the time you get to be 40, nothing surprises you anymore. And that's exactly the problem, that nothing surprises you anymore. And I'm going to dip a little bit into this with the next slide where we're going to talk about magic. But I want to point out to you that there's so many beautiful, miraculous things around us that we just take for granted, that are not interesting anymore. And we should be aware of the power of habits. And there should be something about not doing business as usual. More importantly, there should actually be something about doing things differently and being a little spontaneous. Sometimes you're giving a presentation, you decide to jump. Why? Because nobody expected that to happen, and it's fun to do that sometimes. And if you approach this from a fractal standpoint, being spontaneous and random and doing things a little differently on a small scale might actually equate to you being a little different and being able to change your ways. The ski tracks are especially terrible and troublesome if you're depressed or really anxious or stuck in any other negative pattern. Because gosh, it's so easy to just go down the same path. So please, whatever you do, try to mix it up a little bit. Learn something new, do something new, learn an instrument, go to new places. Drive home differently, the classic cliche example, brush your teeth with your left hand. Do this to be spontaneous, but at minimum, do this to not become boring. Because we're all going to become boring if we keep doing things as we've been. I think we all need to believe in magic. And it doesn't have to be magic per se, but we should believe in something that is greater than ourselves. Because as I tell a lot of my patients also, that if you think you're the top of the food pyramid, the only way left is down. And where is magic? Where in our lives is magic? You know, in my opinion, it's everywhere. You just gotta look. You're too busy texting. You're too busy rushing from one meeting to the next. And the reality is we live in a magical world full of beautiful things. Nature is beautiful. Love is beautiful, if you think about it, right? Like love is such a powerful thing that we can't quite put into words, and yet it moves us so. Music. So all these examples for me, you know, it's important to kind of keep that childlike curiosity alive. It's interesting, if you look at the way kids interact with the world versus adults, a kid would be up here thinking like, whoa, this is like the coolest microphone ever, and oh, you guys are here, you know? And adults are like, okay, yeah, whatever, we're here. We take basic things for granted, and the reality is we're all surrounded by beautiful things. I use the example of tinfoil, because when I was a kid, the first time I played with tinfoil, I said to myself, this is the coolest thing ever. It's metal that I can bend, I can rub things off, and oh look, it's got a penny on it now. You know what I mean? Like, and it's magical, and it's shiny, and it's cool. And then I got older, and tinfoil became garbage. And I'm not saying we all need to sit there and you know, deeply obsess about every little thing around us and play with tinfoil again, but I repeat, everything I've said to you today is intended to be taken on a spectrum. And if you think you're too much of an adult, you might benefit a little bit from becoming more of a kid. And if you have children, it's especially easy, because then you just look at what they're doing and just be with them, because they're doing what they should be doing. They're exploring this beautiful, magical world that we live in. So I want to say, you know, it's important. Wow more. Do things that give you goosebumps. Look for those opportunities. And when that does happen, speaking of the ski hill, be with it. Because you should realize that the ski hill has the bad patterns built in, but it's also got some beautiful side tracks built in. And if you happen to decide that you're going to go through the woods today and you saw something beautiful, you should do that again more often, because you can wear those tracks in too. So I'm going to conclude here, and I'm going to say that, you know, I hope everybody, a couple of key points I wanted everyone to take home. Number one, good science. I think that just makes sense in anything that we do. Practicing now, and that emphasizes the importance of two things, practicing and now, and accept that it's going to be small things. I hope each and every one of you can walk out of here today and just for a second close your eyes and feel how sun feels on your face, or how beautiful that little flower looks over there. Because the reality is that no matter how depressed and sad and terrible you might feel, we do live in a world of beauty, a world that loves you. If you look at it, there are so many beautiful things around all of us each day that you just have to stop and look. It's there. Just do it. Don't resist reality. That I think we covered that pretty well. You know, pop out, sit and feel. If you're feeling things, it's okay. Be with it. Write about it. And when you think you've done enough, then you can let it go. And the art of popping out, I can't emphasize enough also, so important. Don't take yourselves too seriously. Most things that you're feeling will pass. And having the ability to pop out and look at yourself objectively is hugely important. So I hope you all can at least go out there and enjoy the sunshine. And thank you so much for listening to me. Really appreciate that.
Question on sleep and good science. So if you're talking to your kids or talking to yourself about trying to, for example, go to sleep early and see how you feel, would you give that a month, 2 months, a week? Like what are appropriate horizons?
To maintain like a sleep schedule, I would say about like 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks. Often, like in the way I see it also, some people have sleep apnea. They start using a CPAP. And they say, oh, this doesn't, I don't understand why, I don't think this is helping. And it's like, well, you're on week 1, wait a little longer. Sleep is one of those shower dial problems where like it's a 2 to 3 week lag. And that's where people get lost because we're all living in an ADHD society where you want results now. And if you don't see results, then okay, I'm doing the next thing. So for sleep especially, I'd say weeks, 3 weeks is a pretty reasonable time. Please.
So I'm a therapist, and I see a lot of my clients that have sleep issues, gut issues, anxiety, and it always seems to be the same. So when you're working with a patient, can you talk about that and how it gets resolved?
Oh gosh, I can't say enough. I mean, sleep plays such a big role in metabolism. People can gain weight, have trouble with carb craving. It increases your risks of heart disease. Autoimmune and inflammatory conditions, clear correlation with sleep deprivation. Your immune system goes on overdrive when you're sleep deprived. Some autoimmune things can go on auto-drive. And I've seen irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, eczema. All these autoimmune inflammatory things can get a lot worse with sleep deprivation. But also like cognitive performance. I have so many people that are like, I've had 30-year-old students come see me and say, Alex, I think I have Alzheimer's. I walk into a room, I forget why, I can't focus in class, I can't pay attention, and I haven't had this before. And you ask them how they're sleeping, and you find out that they're sleeping 6 hours a night, or their sleep is choppy, or anxiety is disrupting their sleep. And I mean, it just plays such a big role in how our bodies recharge that to ignore that is a big deal.
But if they can't sleep, what are you giving them so that they can get to sleep?
Well, so there is this yin-yang between day function and night function, how we are by day and how we sleep by night. And the key there, I think, is to just understand, well, what's the root of the sleep disorder? And that could be a whole spectrum of things, ranging from anxiety to insomnia, to jet lag, to delayed sleep phase. Some people are night owls, and they're living in a morning type, they might be working a morning job. But as a psychiatrist, I can tell you also, depression and anxiety, sleep is always the tip of the iceberg, and that's usually what's going on, or quite often what's going on. And in that case, addressing the core issue certainly helps. And no doubt, I mean, yeah, sometimes I also have pharmacology to get people to sleep. And again, I apply, the yoga principles there. It's like, let's get you better and back it off slowly. But there is something to be said about an effective reboot. And I think people need to have a good experience sometimes, you know what I mean? If you've been suffering from insomnia for 2 years, it's okay if a little bit of medicine gets you to sleep for the next month. That lets you, lets the other parts of your life fill in around it to reinforce that pattern.
I read the Michael Pollan book as well, and I'm curious about what you think about psychedelics in the future with depression.
I'm so happy you asked. Jeannie, I want to give a talk on this later. Okay. So I think we should, so the scientific community, I don't want to get, I'm going to get my license suspended. No, but I think I can say this pretty liberally. I think there's a loss of, there's irrationality in medicine. The reality with a lot of psychedelic drugs, I think, and this is what's emerging now. So there's studies on people microdosing LSD. And what blew my mind that I read about this, speaking to like the beautiful natural world that we live in, they've commented that people that microdosed LSD, and we're talking 1/10 of the dose that you would have taken in college, like a low dose, teeny little thing. And what I can tell you is biologically, so number one, biologically, they seem to sensitize the serotonin system. So people with treatment-resistant depression have commented that low-dose psychedelics have helped. I'm not encouraging use, but we can talk about it. But what I can tell you is one thing that really struck me, a lady that had treatment-resistant depression for years, the first day that she took LSD microdose, She walked out and she said, "The leaves look greener and more beautiful and the sky is more blue." And that is a powerful experience. That has the ability to change your mood. That, again, brings you into that childlike sense of wonder that is the antidote to what's wrong in our society and all of us being busy today. There's a lot of research now around psychedelic mushrooms. Also, in the book at Johns Hopkins at NYU, they took terminally ill cancer patients that had never, ever, they were Republicans that had never smoked a joint in their lives. But what from a single experience, these people's depression scores were improved by 80% for about 8 months later. There's no drug in my arsenal that can do that. And getting back to the Michael Pollan book, he describes that if you look at fMRI studies of the brain under psychedelics, you got a lot of crosstalk. So literally, the same old ski hill is not happening. You now have all the other ski hills going on, which also makes you realize, I mean, if you're prone to psychosis, that is not a good idea, right? Again, if we're looking at like system stability, if things are not stable, that's not a good idea. Oh, maybe some mushrooms will make this better. That's not accurate. But there are people, I think, for whom, yeah, I mean, it has the potential to change lives. And the huge thing also I say to a lot of my patients often ask me about psychedelics, and I guide them, but I can't do it with them. The best way I could say it, and the mistake that happened with psychedelics was sort of like, I compare it to like if somebody gave you a kit to build an airplane, it doesn't mean you should build it and fly it on your own. And the reality with a lot of psychedelics is not that they're good or bad, it's that they're powerful. They're really powerful. And that's where the importance of set and setting comes into play. And set and setting means the atmosphere, the environment that you're in, the therapeutic guidance, the direction, setting an intention before you do these things, and having a forum in which you can discuss your experiences is tremendously important. And in my opinion, I do think this is the next upcoming revolution in psychiatry, because these things are just too powerful to ignore.
Actually, Michael Pollan did a podcast with, I think it was Fresh Air, and it was about his experience when he was taken through using the psychedelics, and it's a great listen.
And I should say also, like, it's funny, they're called recreational drugs and addictive drugs. They're not addictive. I could say that as a psychiatrist. They're not. I'm talking about mushrooms and LSD. But what I also want to point out is that these experiences are so powerful. This is not something you want to do again next week.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? Like if you're really doing it the right way, it's turbo therapy where you get to wander through your own mind, knowing everything you know, with perhaps even heightened visual ability. And that is not always a fun weekend. So whenever people tell me about, oh, it's addictive, yeah, I could think of a lot of more addictive things. What blows my mind, mushrooms have gotten people off cigarettes.
Right.
Yeah, there's data that like
all drugs, really, don't they use it for? They were using
Like,
it
yeah,
a
they're
long
using
time
it.
ago for alcoholics and.
So yeah, so I'm always a little shy to bring this up, but apparently Wilson, the founder of AA,
Yeah.
initially had experimented with LSD,
Psychedelics, yeah.
and he argued, believe in a higher power, that there's an element of sort of like there is something. Pollan describes it as like it shakes the snow globe.
Yeah.
And again, it's like if your habit is drinking, is going to possibly change your habit of drinking.
Yeah. Sam Harris is the one you should listen to who interviewed Michael Pollan. If you want to hear the full, Sam Harris is my god. But anyway, he interviewed Michael Pollan.
Waking up, I think, yeah, I'm next on my list.
Yeah.
But I think we're on the verge of a revolution, and I'm very excited for it. Because it's just.
They're training therapists right now.
So I've signed on. I've actually signed up to be an investigational site for MDMA PTSD treatment. Why?
Congratulations.
We're trying. We're working on it. But what I can tell you guys is like also PTSD. They took veterans that had an average duration of illness of 17 years. These are people with real, deep, unresolved experiences and trauma. 2 trips later, they're 90% improved. I don't have anything that powerful. And again, I mean, it speaks to the power of these things and the need to be doing these things intelligently.
So, one is, you talked about changing habits. Do you have methods that you like, that you use yourself with your patients, or maybe refer patients to other methods that help people in that direction of changing habits? That's one question. And the other one that was missing from here is hormone changes in relation to sleep. which probably a lot of people here are familiar with?
Both good questions. But what I can tell you, so most of the talk about changing habits, I hope all these principles generally apply. You know what I mean?
But you won't just tell a person, oh, just change their habits, and they will just change their habits, right?
No. I think we need to be looking at sort of like, so number one, you have to realize what can you do today that's different. Change can happen. I'm a big believer in not always meeting the problem head on, but in possibly approaching it through other avenues. And the power of spontaneity, the power of doing things differently, not doing things the same way, starts getting that momentum going towards change. It's sort of like thinking, well, what can you do today that's different? Or how do you look at things? I think also fundamentally, as I was saying, people have to understand, they have to want to change. They have to understand that there's a problem. And part of what I was trying to convey today is that if you look at the Darwin-Buddha balance, if you look at your sleep problems, you might just get a strong enough kick in the butt to realize like there really is a problem. This is not okay. Because to be honest with you, I think a lot of us are used to powering things through. And we say, it's okay. I got these issues, but it's all right, I'm doing okay. It's easier to just keep going, right? The ski hill is easier this way. And that's where it kind of comes down to like, well, no, the ski hill is not okay. This is not working. I'm talking about like health habits. I'm talking about pharmacology. And I'm talking about the psychological interventions that can get you better. But at minimum, I think, certain principles here, being able to be present, popping out of your own feelings, and just remembering to constantly do that in situations where you get washed down the river are essential. To answer your question about hormone replacement, or hormones.
Replacement, just hormone changes and sleep.
So yeah, a lot of issues arise around menopause. Progesterone was one of the hormones that does help with, it increases the levels of GABA, and GABA is like a calming, sleep-inducing neurotransmitter. Estrogen is believed to sensitize women to the effects of serotonin. And what I'll often see, speaking to hormones, women sometimes you'll see that there's a life course of post PMDD, right? Which is like after your period, like before your period, there'll be a significant mood dip. Postpartum depression after the birth of children, some women get a pretty significant depressive episode. And then, of course, in menopause, there's another substantial change in mood and sleep. The hormones play a huge role. And I can tell you, there was a lady I was working with in my practice who, for the first time in her life, attempted suicide from a depression that resulted from a big drop in estrogen levels. And thankfully, she's okay, and we got her much better now. But that's how powerful the hormone changes can be. And certainly sleep is definitely impacted.
So how do you approach this?
So again, in these cases, we do sort of rely on pharmacology to some degree. I believe in a holistic model, of course, so we'll do cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, we'll try meditation, we'll try a lot of things. We'll also get them to see a OBGYN that specializes in hormones or an endocrinologist. Replacing estrogen and progesterone for some women is very beneficial, and sometimes negates the need for further psychiatric pharmacology. But usually in people that have a significant post-menopause change in mood or sleep, there's often a life history of sort of hormonal sensitivity. And those are telltale signs of the bigger thing that happens in menopause. Sure.
Men and sleep, how women are good about admitting when they need to get help. Men are like zombies if they're not getting enough sleep, but don't always do what they need to do to make the good sleep happen, I find.
Yeah, no, I sometimes see that too. I think the reality is, I think somebody slapped me with this like article on high functioning depression about a month ago, and that's just been resonating in my head. And the reality is, I think a lot of us are used to driving with like a flat tire. Men, women, everybody. Like the reality is, you're used to push it through, don't complain. Darwin, kill or be killed, conquer rule be number one, you'll be all right. And the answer there is, I think you just need to be aware of it. And you got to look for other signs. Again, sleep is easy because sleep, you could definitely say, okay, I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm exhausted during the day. I tell my patients, well, how much caffeine are you drinking? You know what I mean? Like, oh, you feel good, you're okay, oh, but you drank a pot of coffee today. Or, oh, you have a Red Bull at 6 o'clock, you know what I mean? So I think there's, and then cognitive, the way I sell to a lot of high functioning people on sleep, because everybody says, oh, sleep is a waste of time. But the cell there is also like your brain needs sleep to function optimally. And there's a lot of great research on this, where if we have you memorize a list of words and you know it well, and we let you sleep 8 hours and we let you sleep 4 hours, and we test you both in the morning, more sleep is better. You remember more things, you're smarter, you're more creative. And that's where I transition from repair into more optimization, where I tell people, I'm like, you could be doing better. An extra hour or two of sleep a night, there's actually unmet potential. There was an interesting study where, this was a while ago, they took college kids that said that they were getting enough sleep, they felt that they were okay. They were getting about 6 or 7 hours. And they made them all wear these like trackers, and they forced them all to sleep an extra hour. What was profound in that study is that like 80% of kids came back and said, wow, I feel better. Even though like they said there was nothing wrong in the first place. So I think we're all kind of blinded by caffeine and the busyness of life to even understand how much we're hurting.
There's a great book, I don't know if you guys have seen it, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's a good read, and it alludes to everything that Alex talked about. Every body system is affected by your sleep. Your memory, cardiovascular, immunity. It's very poignant. And
I often even ask my patients, are you depressed or are you tired? Because they can look so similar. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times people come to see me and they're like, oh, doctor, I'm depressed. And it's like, the key question I always ask is like, do you feel like doing stuff and not have the energy to do it? Or do you just not care to do things in the first place? Right? Because intent is 9/10 of the law, you know what I mean? And the reality is like, tired people want to do things and they're just exhausted. I can't, I'd like to, but I can't. And then depressed people actually don't care. But they're that close, depression and fatigue.
I have a question. You touched on the topic of anxiety earlier. Can you describe to us, people with anxiety that you see often that becoming an issue, and to fix the anxiety issue, do you have to uncover the problem that's causing it, or can it go away over time? And can you kind of link anxiety to depression? Is it bidirectional, or one causes the other?
So I do often see depression with anxiety. Some believe that depression is ultimately anxiety turned inward, that you kind of burn out of being anxious and you eventually turn it inwards. But I also, on the flip side, see people that are anxious because they're depressed. And what ends up happening is that for them it's such trudgery to get through the day, or to get out and go to work and do all these things and answer these emails. And that makes them anxious because it's just like you're being dragged up on stage and you don't want to be here. You know?
Like this fear, like you're afraid of doing things that's different.
So I should also point out, so anxiety comes in a multitude of flavors. And to be honest with you, I think that like the waste bucket diagnosis of anxiety needs to be like further divided. At minimum, I can tell you that there's the kind of anxiety that's in the head and in the body. And some people have both. I think there's people that catastrophize, that obsess and ruminate, can't let things go. But then there's people that just like, I feel like tension today and I don't know why. And in those patients as well, like I think certainly worth psychological investigation to understand what caused what. But yeah, and in patients that have that mental ruminative worry, there's also interventions for that. But I think it's healthy to break down the anxiety problem into what kind is it? What's going on? And I often tell a lot of people also, I think anxiety, people say, oh, who in this room has anxiety? And everybody says, oh, not me, I'm okay. But then you ask, well, who here thinks too much and can't stop? And then suddenly like more hands come up. To me, anxiety is almost like it's a stickiness thinking problem. There's some people that almost can't stop thinking. And I do conceptualize that as a bit of again, to me, that is partly a departure from the heart to the mind. Where it's almost easier to think about, oh God, what if there's a nuclear war with China? Like what's going to happen? Rather than thinking like, oh man, like, I'm not happy with my job. I've seen that a lot. One therapist that I've worked with at some point commented that anxiety is almost like it's a drink. It's like alcohol. It gets you actually away from this moment and thinking about, oh, and then there's this thing going on. It's easier to worry about some thinking globally, acting locally, global problem, than to realize that, oh God, I'm just not happy in my marriage, or my job, I hate it. You know what I mean? And that's the source of anxiety. But it's so much easier to think about other things, addictively. These thoughts are addictive a little bit. And that's what I was saying, like it's sort of like stickiness, sticky thoughts.
Sort of along those lines, if someone has a specific episode, so a person who's never had it before has an episode in their life that creates some anxiety, and then it's like a pattern, so you may get over that original trauma that caused this new pattern of behavior, but now you have these ski tracks, and so your brain is like, okay, now I'm catastrophizing, and every sniffle is pneumonia and all these things. So I guess my question is, if your anxiety is the result of a significant trauma, one thing, can you get past that, or now are you always going to have anxiety? Is there a way to actually heal yourself of that pattern so that it doesn't become repetitive?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy, I mean, there's so many different modalities to approach that with. Absolutely. And even I was saying, like, you know, confronting the boogeyman, exploring the darkness, you know what I mean? Like, those are all valid ways of resolving things like an episode of anxiety. But what I'd also want to point out, I think some of us are inherently wired a little hotter than others. You got that too, you know what I mean? Like, there's babies. So some of the coolest stuff they've done with babies is they'll have like a platform that's glass and over like a, you know, it's high up, and there'll be a toy out there. And at like, you know, 8 months of age, some babies will crawl to the edge and stop, and other babies don't care and they'll go get the toy. I often even wonder, like colicky kids and anxiety, like what's the connection there? Because there's kids that are just never comfortable. They always need something. They're kind of squirmy and they don't sleep good. Well. But I do think it's a stress diathesis model, which basically means, you know, you got some genetic programming to be a certain level of reactive, and the same thing that might cause an actual ongoing anxiety problem for one person, for the other might be, you know, like no big deal.
How does one go about finding a therapist? It feels like it feels challenging to find a good therapist, whether it's marriage or whatever. Do you have any recommendations?
What I generally counsel, so I mean, I have relationships with people that I've worked with where I know the work that they do and how they work. And I do try to match on personality a little bit. There's a website now, I think 2 Chairs, I think it's called, where they claim that they'll have interviewed the therapists and know what their style is, and they'll figure out your style, and they try to match make you that way, I guess. But I think ultimately, I kind of like to go by word of mouth recommendation, and it also comes down to, I think you should almost interview like 1 or 2 therapists, perhaps 3, come in for an hour, sit with them.
This feels like such a roadblock to people who are looking for therapy.
But sit with them. Interview 3 at least, or 2. And put in, yeah, sure, it might be it's somewhat costly and time consuming, but it's an important relationship. Otherwise, you're kind of going to be there on session number 6 thinking I'm wasting my time. And I'll be honest, even in those cases, when people do find that I've sat in therapy and I think I'm wasting my time, I tell them, did you tell your therapist? You should. You shouldn't be telling me this. I get it, okay, you don't think it's a good fit, but go tell them, and maybe they can adjust, and you know, your own resistance is meaningful, you know. So definitely be forthcoming.
You talked a lot about having not enough sleep. What about having too much sleep? Because my teenager comes home and she sleeps for a day, and that's because she's at college. But I did hear about an article about Alzheimer's and too much sleep. Have you looked at that?
I'm not familiar with Alzheimer's and too much sleep, but what I can tell you is, so you're a teenager. I mean, sleep deprived and catching up. And by the way, like if any, like this whole thing of like high school starting at 8 a.m. is just, it's cruel. And everybody's like, oh, teenagers are lazy. They're not lazy. They're biologically programmed to stay up at night. It's a fact. And that's where if you take a kid that's, you know, falls asleep at 2 or 1 a.m., they got to wake up at 7. Yeah, after a week of that, they end up with a sleep debt, and on the weekends they're going to sleep too much. As for your other question about Alzheimer's, I'm not sure about Alzheimer's and sleeping too much, but I can tell you also that generally, you know, people that are depressed sleep too much. People that are sick or have some, you know, can have cardiac issues, they'll also sleep too much. People that have sleep apnea sleep too much, because there it's a trade-off between quality and quantity of sleep. So those are all things that can prolong how long people sleep at night. I think there were some studies also that being a long sleeper is not healthy either. like sleeping too little or too much is not good. But I think that upper limit is pretty high. I think it's like 12 hours or 11 hours. It was a lot. And the question is also, is like sustained, right? It's one thing if your daughter comes home and does this for 2 nights and then she normalizes. It's a different story if it's been going on for a month.
Do this quick up here. He had no idea I was coming today. I've been a patient of Dr. Dimitriu for over a year, and what he inherited was someone with about 4 hours sleep a night, terrible anxiety. The root of it was a medical thing that I was very worried about, not cancer, but similar level of worry. And probably the most resistant person to big pharma meds on the planet. And we've worked together, and I can attest to virtually every single thing he said today. I was nodding my head almost the whole presentation. I can also attest to the fact that he is not indeed on aphrodisiacs. He's really this excited about life. And I feel almost like a new person compared to what he saw more than a year ago. I'm not there yet. It's a process, right? I'm weaning off the med. But I have energy. I'm not catastrophizing as much. I'm calmer. I'm not as reactive. No, I don't have the stereotypical overreactivity and temper, maybe a little. I just can't tell you how different I feel, and I have no idea about the demographics of this group or anything about the group. I just heard about the talk and showed up. And so I just wanted to sort of give a testimonial, like a live Yelp. Thank you so much. Because I now feel a lot less depression, less anxiety, more hopeful, kind of the entire spectrum of things that he was talking about, and just absolute living proof right here.
Thank you, Bobby.